Great. Awesome. All right. Well, obviously we're a little rusty, but that's fine because I'm struggling to wake up today. Yeah. Well, like I was saying, just had my last race of the season over the weekend. It was a 52-mile race with about 12,000 feet of climbing. Pretty serious effort. First time I've done 50 miles in 2 years. So definitely going the distance felt, like really challenging, really challenging. As I mentioned, and now I have to recap because we weren't recording, just for everybody who's going to tune in later. But yeah, I've been really struggling to recover this week. And I feel like that was expected because I did another pretty long race. I would say objectively another really long race about 6 weeks before this one, and it's been a long season, and I've already run like 2,500 miles this year, which is a lot for me. So I'm feeling it this week. I've been struggling to have energy throughout the day or to get through like a half day without needing a nap. And yeah, I mentioned my meditations I've been turning into just falling asleep. And just feeling what I would consider to be fatigue, not tiredness, like actual fatigue. And so like it's definitely, I think important, and something that's been on my mind, I've been thinking about all of you this week, is really respecting the distance and the effort in which you are choosing to involve yourself with the goals that you have. These things are the real deal. When you go and decide to do, for me, a 52-mile race with 12,000 feet of climbing, and it's, an 8-hour and 40-minute race, that's no joke. And I think, sometimes it really makes me go back to like this kind of process that I go through when I choose my goals. And it's like, the first thing is like, would I tell anybody about this? If I was to like do this goal, would I do it if I couldn't tell anybody about it? And that answer has to be yes every time, because what you're doing is so objectively hard. And you're signing up for this because it's hard, and you can't sign up for it just because you want to tell, your friends at the end of the day that you did something really hard. You have to do it for you. And yeah, as a coach, and I think, we all see this, particularly, I'm going on finishing my 4th year as basically a full-time coach, which is pretty crazy how fast the time goes. But I see this a lot where athletes have these huge dreams to go run these really, really long races. And to be objectively fair about it, they don't have the experience yet to really approach those goals from a solid foundation. And so the athlete, maybe they don't achieve that goal, or afterwards they feel so destroyed that they never want to run again. So I really urge you guys, when you're choosing these events and you're making your schedules, one, don't race that frequently. Give yourself time in between these events. I would say for me, having done a lot of endurance events, taking 6 weeks between 9-hour events, definitely pushing, was definitely a push for me. And I do this as my job. So for other athletes, you have to really consider, I'm doing 100K this weekend, and in 2 weeks, I'm going to do a marathon.
Yeah, we're not
doing that. You're not. Like, don't do that to yourself. It's not worth it because, one, you're going to be incredibly tired. Two, there's a lot going on at a cellular level that you might not feel. For me, after the race, I was, really exhausted on Sunday, and then Monday, we drove back on Sunday afternoon, and Monday I was like, oh, I feel pretty normal again. And I was getting back into my rhythm and things. And then in the afternoon, I had like a very surprising crash of energy. And it just kind of spoke to me. And then every day, basically this week has been like that. It's really reminded me like, these are serious things. So you better be ready for them when you sign up. You better be ready to put the work in. And you better be ready for the recovery process because it is really long. And it asks of you to do things for yourself after the race, just in the same way that you would before the race. So I really wanted to mention that, especially, athletes who are considering 100 milers and 100Ks and 50 milers, like all of these long events. Yeah, why not take 3 years to build for that? I took 7 years to build for this last race. And I'm going to be taking a lot more years before I even try to run 100 miles because
You're doing 100K though.
Yeah. And finally, it's, 8 years. 8 years.
Solid base.
So it's like a long time to train for that. And that's just running specific training. That doesn't include all the other, athletics and endurance sports that I've been involved with since long before that. So respect the distance. The second thing that I really wanted to mention, and I think is a big game changer, is don't be surprised when you're out there on race day and it's hard. That's the moment that you signed up for. I had a really great conversation with a friend of mine yesterday he's not an endurance athlete. He's a professional climber. And he mentioned to me this idea of having like this peaceful warrior mentality when you go into your race or your big send day. That's what they call it in climbing, your big send day. And it's the idea that when you get to the crux of your day, for example, the race that I did over the weekend had 2 pretty big cruxes. Right before 55K, there's a 6 mile, 2,500 foot climb, and then the end of the race ends with a 6 to 7 mile, 2,400 foot climb. So these 2 really difficult, but very runnable long climbs, those are like the cruxes of my race. When you go into these events and you study the profile and you choose to do that race, you're doing that with the understanding of like, these are definitely going to be the really hard moments of the race, but that's what you signed up for. You didn't sign up for the easy parts. You signed up for the hard parts. And so sometimes as a coach, and even as an athlete, I found it to be, and I'm not sure if Kylie or Zoe can relate to this in their coaching or in their own athletics, but sometimes you get to that hard part, and with all the training that you've done and all the preparation, your expectation around that hard part is, oh, I'm going to crush it. Oh, I'm going to feel, so strong on this hard part. That's what I've been training for. But in my experience, that hard part really doesn't ever not feel hard. And so we sign up for that. That's your warrior moment. That's the moment where you have to rise to the occasion, where you've put yourself in this position and now you rise to that occasion and work through that hard moment in a positive way. For me, that looks like a lot of positive inner dialogue, not looking at the numbers on my watch at all, not looking at the time elapsed even. It's really getting present in that moment, thinking about each individual stride. How smooth can I be right now? How smooth can I be right now? Rather than bringing in all of these externals that may work against me and my mindset. Because that's the moment where that's what, we were signing up for that. That's where we're really deciding this is the time, this is where all my training is going to come in and work for me if I allow it to, rather than if I get in my own way and be like, this is harder than I thought. So being really careful with those expectations and I think really having a lot of intention in those moments, super important. So that was another really big takeaway for me. And I think it can be for all of you guys, because I've seen this with a lot of athletes get to that hard moment. And even though you've trained and even though you put a lot of time in that hard moment and it doesn't feel how you expected it to feel, and then it's a DNF rather than, can I rise to the occasion now and see, how I feel at the other end of this? Fortunately for me, the crux was like that finish line finally was the end of that long climb. But in the beginning of my race, right before 50K, 6+ mile, 2,500 feet of climbing, super runnable, very mental, very easy to get in a tough mental space when your climb just lasts and lasts and goes and goes and goes forever.
Takes a lot of discipline to
Yeah,
not
it's really
get
challenging.
too far ahead of yourself.
Totally. And to run the mile that you're in. I can't remember if that was an Addie Bracy thing,
I
but
think that's like
I really,
every runner thing.
I guess so, but I think that whoever came up with that,
Yeah.
super smart, right? Like being successful at all this stuff is about being present. It's really about that. I'm sorry, the dog is such a distraction. She's really, really struggling right now when we don't pay attention to her. Anyways, I just wanted to mention these things because I think that they can be good takeaways for all of you guys. I don't know if if Kylie or Zoe, if you guys have, like any comments, if that anything in your own coaching that kind of came to mind, or how you work with athletes to kind of prepare for those like cruxy moments of each race.
Yeah, I tend to emphasize visual, and I write this in all my pre-race emails to my athletes, is I tell them to explicitly plan for not the perfect day, because if you go in and all of your preparation has been around executing the perfect day, then you're going to really struggle when those inevitable things do pop up. And I think that that's really important. And also, it's okay if you never race ultras.
Yeah.
Also valid.
Super stoked when my athletes decide not to do hundreds, especially when they've only been running for a few years.
And especially as someone that did a shorter race this weekend, it was so dope.
Yeah,
and,
you crushed it.
Didn't miss a day of training. It's so great to race and then be done by lunch and not be wrecked. And I think that short races are underrated both as training tools and as competition in and of themselves.
Yeah. Kylie, I'm not sure what are your thoughts?
As somebody that doesn't do the longer events, I would say, your training is in your key workouts are times to kind of test your ability to push yourself a little bit. That's kind of where you develop some of your toughness, especially on long runs and hard workouts. I'm not saying every run you should be going hard. That's definitely not what I'm saying, but hard workouts and long runs, that's kind of where toughness is built, I would say. And then I also kind of wanted, on another note, going back to your recovery piece, I had an athlete that did a race recently, and they were struggling with the recovery piece in regards to, I have friends that they recovered this quickly, and I feel really tired. I feel like I should be better by now. And it had only been 2 weeks or something. And I was like, look, don't compare yourself to other people's recovery. I think we do that with a lot of things, nutrition, what people are doing in their everyday life, that comparison trap. And I think realizing that everyone's an individual and everyone has their own timeline. So for recovery, just chat with your coach and just communicate, and then you guys can figure out what the best recovery strategy is for you. I think that's important. And I just thought of that when you mentioned you were really having a hard time this week, because I just kind of talked to this person about how focus on yourself, we'll get through it, and we can adjust the training. And that's another reason why, with races, like you were saying, be careful how you're planning your races, because if it takes you longer to recover from something, you might not want to have a 50 miler and then another race 3 weeks later. So really kind of giving some perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that's super. Yeah. Thank you, Kylie. That's such a good reminder for the athletes, because some people, and every race is different. And so your recovery is going to change all the time. I remember a few years ago, I ran the North Face 50, and like felt fine a week later. But then earlier in that season, I had done the Silver Rush 50 and it took me a month to feel normal. So it can change all the time. I think to be open to that, to make sure that you hold all of that really loosely, especially like if your plan is, we're going to require you to do a little running, normally for my athletes after a 50 miler, it's going to be at least 5 days of rest, a day off for every 10 miles you raced. It's okay to stretch that a little bit. 6-7 days, probably the most, because I don't want you guys to lose fitness, and you do start to lose fitness around that 6th or 7th day. But you can just go out there and jog, and that's kind of what I'm reminding myself of right now, because I'm supposed to start training again today. And my next race is in February, and there's no rush. I've given myself a lot of time now to prepare for that next race. And I can kind of relax and enjoy like a bit of a fall because I've put all this effort in already. And that's really key. And I really like the mention of just like not comparing yourself too, because some athletes are going to go out there and hammer. After TMR, I started doing workouts like the very next week, and I didn't actually feel tired after that race until the 3rd week. And then I got really injured and had to take an entire 7 days off.
Which like it also depends on the nature of the race,
right? Totally.
TMR like was a big day on feet, but I mean, for me at least, there was so much power hiking that like I recovered pretty well.
Yeah.
Like
it's so different.
It's really different.
That power hiking is awesome.
Whereas like when I've done Dead Horse, which is a 50 miler in Utah with a substantial amount of slick rock, I always feel like recovering from that race specifically is like real cruxy. And it's always like in late or late November too. So it's kind of like where you are in your, season can impact recovery as well. Like, and how deep, like as you race more ultras, your recovery gets better, but also, I don't know, sometimes mentally at the end of the season, you're kind of like, oh God.
There was definitely a moment in my race where I was like, I really feel like 6 weeks ago, I went to the mental well, and here I am doing it again. Like, I'm really going to need to like take a solid rest after this and and let that kind of part of me recharge over several months before going in again. Like, I definitely felt like the events were close together. And that's what happens when you throw something on your schedule after you've already made your schedule, because you've changed your goals. And sometimes these things happen and you just do your best. But I definitely, recommend like really being mindful with yourself when you're putting those goals together and taking the appropriate amount of time between races. Denzel also mentioned something pretty cool here, and I appreciate you guys using the chat box and whatnot to kind of bring your opinions into the conversation. But he mentions that he tells himself, and Denzel really likes long races. We just trained for 100 together. He's talking about being hit by a bus twice during the race, which is really interesting because I can relate to that over the weekend on these like 2 cruxy long climbs, one in the middle and one at the end of my race. And it's kind of like that in preparing for that. And when you're out there running, it's really up to you. And he mentions like relying really on himself and planning for his crew not showing up for him, and these scenarios that would further kind of challenge his circumstances mentally and physically out there on a long race. And I think that is really important, because in the end, you're the one that has to run your race. And we've talked about this, plenty of times when athletes are like, what's my marathon effort? What's my race strategy? And it's like, you have to figure these things out largely for yourself, because you're the one that has to execute these things for you on race day. So if you don't take that ownership and you put that on somebody else who's not going to be out there in your physical body running for you, that's going to be really challenging for you on race day. And I think that, you know, for a lot of athletes, you know, owning it looks different for each person. For me, that's really like reaching like a zero mindset mentality going into the race, where I go in free of expectation, regardless of what I've done in my training, regardless of what I've done in previous races. You know, I'm ready to embrace whatever this race offers. And even if I've run this race twice before and won it before, you know, that doesn't mean shit. Like, today is a brand new day and anything can happen. And so you have to not be running based on what you've done in the past. You're running based on this mile right now. And so everybody should be try to be developing some kind of some philosophy or way of approaching a race where you are self-reliant. And then when, you know, Zoe's at the halfway point and she's giving you your water bottles, like that's the bonus that you get, because you're out there doing it, you know, largely you're doing the running on your own. It is a collaboration of many. You have a coach in your corner, you have the volunteers, you have the other runners that you're cheering on and supporting, yet still you are in your own body moving your legs towards the finish line.
And a mindset I've adopted in my longer races, even and especially when I have crew, is that like when you pick the right crew, they're going to want to try to do everything for you. But the more you empower yourself to be in charge and to keep calling the shots, that will actually keep you more competitively engaged than like being the person that sits down and lets someone else like change their shoes for them.
Oh yeah, that is like, we've talked about this because
I think that's huge. Like you have to not let shit happen to you. You need to, at every juncture possible, be the person who is in control.
And that's really important, especially for hundreds where, and, you know, we kind of experienced a little bit of this at Leadville in 2017-18, where it becomes really difficult for an athlete late in a race to make like autonomous decisions in an aid station with their crew about what they need. And the reliance becomes on other people. Do you need gels? Do you need electrolytes? Do you need water? Like, do you need to sit? Do you need a shoulder massage? I don't know, all of these things. And I actually think, you know, having some kind of little laminated checklist of like little questions you pull out of your vest pocket to ask yourself, to remind you to tell people what you need so you can stay actively engaged in that process, because people are just like going to be guessing. I'm sorry, the dog. They're going to be.
Her head is stuck in a lamp.
You're going to, you know, people are just going to be guessing because they didn't just run that section with you. Even a pacer might be like, Zoe's not eating enough. She needs like a few more gels or whatever. But really it's going to be, you know, up to you. And that's going to be based on all of the experiences that you've had and the long runs that you've done and the other races that you've done, to be able to be like, actually, like what I really need right now is some soup.
Yeah. It's just mentally really good for you to be like, here's what I need. Here's what I want you to make happen.
Yeah. Well, cool. I hope you guys found that helpful. I know that at least I did. So questions. Let's go like right to a race question, since we've been talking about races. And yes, here it is. Number 13 on the questions list. Oh boy. I just had a tough race. It didn't go the way I wanted, and I ended up DNFing after months of hard work. How long should I wait to sign up for my next event? I really want to try to race that distance again and do it with the fitness I currently have. Love this question.
Yeah, actually.
Thank you, Anonymous.
Yes. My answer to that would be like, do not try to do anything with the fitness you currently have. I think, you know, a lot of us have the experience of going into a race and having it go pretty shittily and then wanting to do almost anything else to like, instead of maybe processing it the way we should with, you know, maybe some more mental attention and additional training, you want to like go right back out and do like a revenge ultra. Don't do that. Like that will not be a good race. Like that, not just physically, because, you know, if you DNF'd, there's typically a reason that's not just going to like go away within weeks or even months. So I would say wait until you have better fitness. Don't try to do a race with the fitness you currently have. I would also say make sure that you fully processed what happens and that you've learned from it and you know what you're going to concretely do different next time, and wait to race again until that race feels like a discrete event from the DNF you just had. Because like if you're going into a race to like make up for the fact that you just did a DNF, that's bringing a lot of really unhealthy baggage into that event. Like it's like a rebound race. Like no one wants to be like the rebound girlfriend. No one wants to be the rebound 100. Like that race deserves better from you and you deserve better from you.
That 400.
That 400, you know, like you deserve to fully learn and grow from that experience. But if you just immediately try to heap more racing on your plate, you're actually undercutting a lot of growth, development, and improvement. You know, when I DNF'd Leadville, I'm just now about to race again at that distance, like over 3 years later.
And you mentioned, because we've been talking a little bit about this week, and I do want to get Kylie involved in the conversation too, but you've been mentioning like that you feel with your 100-miler coming up, like that you put so much time between, you know, Leadville and like definitely the first like year or two, you know, you were really going after Leadville, right? Like, and that was definitely
the race I
still a
wanted to
revenge
do.
race.
Well, I mean, to an extent, but
For
then,
a couple of years, like you were really approaching it that way. Like I need
Yeah.
to get that last 15 miles done. And
Yeah.
now your mindset has really, in my
It's
opinion,
changed.
has
And, like,
really changed.
you know, I've put like 10,000 miles on my legs between where I am now and that DNF, you know?
My legs would be like atrophying.
Like
10,000
that's a
miles.
lot of miles. Like I'm fundamentally a different athlete.
Mhm.
And I would kind of like, my advice would be like, wait until you feel like you're a different athlete. I'm not saying you need to wait 3 years, but you know, I think that it needs to be a discrete event. Like the wrong reason to race is because you
Just had
fucked up a
DNF.
race. Yeah. Like that's a bad reason to race, in my opinion. A
Ki-
good reason to race is because you're ready to race and you're passionate about that race.
You nailed it. Kylie, what are your kind of coaching thoughts on this? Or, you know, as an athlete as well?
I think we are quick to go towards, you know, everyone's doing 100 or a 50-miler. So I think it depends on the length of race that you're doing. Because if somebody is doing something shorter, potentially, if it was a minor issue or something happened, you like tripped and fell and like your leg got slightly hurt or you twisted your ankle or something, you might be able to come back and do another trail marathon in a couple of weeks or something. But I agree. I don't think, like, oftentimes with the longer events, something probably much larger occurred. And I don't think it's a good idea to rush into doing another 50 or 100-miler until you get that figured out. And you've got to sort through those sorts of things. I mean, with the nutrition piece, I see it all the time. It takes time to figure out what's going to work for you nutrition wise. And if you try to do another race in a couple weeks just because your nutrition went wrong, it's probably not going to go well. You need to give yourself at least 2 to 3 months to be practicing a nutrition plan. So even in those situations where people are like, oh, it's just my nutrition, I'm like, well, that can make or break your entire race. So you've got to figure out the things that were the issues in your actual DNF experience, I guess.
What do you guys tell athletes? What do you guys tell an athlete when they've had a tough race and their kind of immediate reaction is like, I'm on ultra signing up for 100 and it's in 6 weeks.
I just got out of a bad relationship, so I'm on Tinder. You know, I'm out here swiping. Why isn't it getting better? Start swiping. That's always the answer. No, I think, again, like, I think you need to really inquire, like, why what you're doing, how that fits in with what your core values are, and how that fits in with your long-term training and goals and life goals. And yeah, I think a lot of times something I tell my athletes is like, when you or someone that you love is going through something tough, there's always this bias towards wanting to like do something about it. But sometimes the best thing is to do nothing. And a quote that I really like from one of my favorite writers, John Green, is don't just do something, stand there. And that's what I would say is like, don't just, rush off to do the next race, like sit with what just happened, learn from it, grow from it, make sure that you're not making decisions out of a place of shame. Make sure you're not making decisions out of a place of not feeling like you're enough because you really need a particular race result. And also don't make sure when you're going for something, you're fully committed, because if there's like even 2% of you that like when you're towing the start line of like particularly a longer event, it's like, well, if I don't have the day I want here, I can always sign up for some other one 3-4 weeks from now. Like, no, like you need to be fully committed. You need to not have an out. You need to make sure that you've eliminated any kind of excuse to not really give it your all when you start something.
Yeah, and letting yourself off the hook like that, like, oh, I really didn't put the training time in, so it's okay that I DNF. No, that's not what we're out here to do. That's not why you.
I would always rather you DNS than DNF.
Own your goals, give them 100% of all that you've got. This is your opportunity to rise up, not to say, oops, I didn't, try enough, or that was just a revenge race. Yeah, Kylie, what do you tell your athletes when they kind of come to you with?
It's kind of along the similar lines to Zoe, but I think ultimately, we're here to give advice and to coach people, and you can make your own decisions. Like you're still the driver of everything that you're doing. But I usually like strongly advise against like certain things and ask questions as well. Like, why are you doing this? Like, do you think this is a good idea? And asking the athlete themselves to try and help them think through it in a more logical manner. Cause I think sometimes when we're doing those sorts of things, it's a irrational versus rational reaction. So kind of asking questions, getting them to think over things, making suggestions. But again, like it all comes down to the athlete's choice. So I'll give my opinion, and then I will allow them to make their final decision.
Yeah. And I think obviously, I'd say this to a lot of athletes, I don't, have to remind you to brush your teeth. Why do I have to remind you to do your mountain legs? You're the driver of the process. You have to take ownership. Some of these things to me, I think, they don't make sense. But I'm here to talk about them with you, ask the right questions, ideally, and hopefully to gently guide you to a place where you decide not to do that redemption race. A big thing for me is if it's 50 miles or more, 16 weeks before the next long run, if you're coming off of a DNF. And there's a few reasons for that. One, we want to recover, because for most of you guys, unless you're DNFing in the first couple miles, you've run a significant amount of miles and you need to rest and recover from that before you can even start preparing for the next event. And you don't want to so say you only ran 50 miles of your 100, that's still 50 freaking miles. That is an objectively long way to go, a lot of impact forces on the body, and you have to respect that. I think it takes a month for an athlete to truly recover from a 50-mile event. Whether or not you feel good in your training or not, there's still things happening at a cellular level that we have to respect, and you're at risk for injury within that 2-week to 4-week period after a long event like that. So 16 weeks. Also, take a week off before you even decide to go on ultra sign up. That's another kind of one of my hard rules with athletes. Like, you carry so much emotion after a race. Even if you did great, you still carry a lot of stoke and all this emotion, and that can cloud your judgment when you're deciding to sign up for a race. So separate yourself from that. Take a few deep breaths, take a few days, and then make a decision. And when you make your decision, make sure you giving yourself ample time to do an entire build to prepare, because we want to take whatever you had done before, and we want to level up on that. Because that's really the key to all of this. Like, it's not necessarily about the outcome, it's about continual growth. This isn't about executing your race day perfectly. This is about, learning, and it's about like working through hard moments and seeing that you're capable of more than you thought. And if at the end, the outcome is you finished 100 miles, then that's the bonus. That's not the first goal. There are many small goals along the way that you have to achieve in order to get, the grand kind of finale of things, which is finishing your 50 mile or your 100. So that's not goal A. That's like goal D or E. That's much farther down the line. And if you're thinking about things that way, you're going to be a lot more successful. I feel like don't do redemption races if you can help it. Talk to your coach. And you guys did a really great job describing all the other reasons why. The one thing that I did want to add to that was when often that we decide that we're going to do a revenge race, I love that revenge race, we become so outcome focused that the opportunity for disappointment is immense when you go to that next race. And if things don't go well, that can be really detrimental to an athlete's mental health. So keep that in mind. These things can't be about the outcome first. Like I mentioned, that's got to be goal E, goal F. Yes, you want to finish, but you have to do all of these small steps along the way in order to make that happen. That's not just execute your training. That's not just like nail your race day fueling. That's not just like, recover really well and work on your sleep. Those are great training steps that help to get you to the start line. But then in that race, you have to do a million process-oriented goals and complete all of those small goals to add up to the big one. So this is so much more about those small steps than it is about those outcomes. Don't forget that. We mentioned a couple times some injury stuff today. So maybe our next question will be, this is on run walks. Is there any literature on run walk programs for people who are returning to running after an extended time period off, a year or more? I imagine there are lots of things to consider, like fitness, bone density, muscular skeletal strength in the system, your capacity. A former PT of mine had a program with very specific run walk workouts. Cool question. Very detail oriented. Thanks, author. Do either of you guys want to jump into this first, or should I?
Yes, there is literature on it.
Tons.
And there is tons. Sometimes I have athletes that work with their PT on a run walk program, and they'll send it to me. I'm like, this is so great. And then occasionally, particularly like with PTs that don't work with like fairly advanced runners, like I've seen plans that are like, day 1, run a mile. Day 2, run 2 miles. That is a 100% volume increase. That is banana, like mathematically, like that, it doesn't make sense at all. Like you don't just 100% increase your volume in a day. That's never appropriate. And I pretty much always do walk run by time as opposed to distance, because particularly when you're injured, distance is a very poor proxy for stress. Like, if you do a 9-minute mile versus a 13-minute mile, that's like fairly different stress on the body, like especially if you're that person who's doubling their volume day by day, that's like adding, it just doesn't make sense to me. So, always run your PT's walk run program by your coach. Typically, we're not going to disagree with PTs because they do know what they're doing, but there are times when someone gives us a return to walk plan that I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that. And it is like very dependent. However, sometimes being hyper specific is kind of like, sometimes things can be so specific that it's like really built on a base of hubris and assumptions about the body. Like, if it's like, we just don't know everyone's bone density. We don't know, unless we've seen a blood test, there's a lot of variables we don't know. So it's kind of silly to do something that's hyper specific when you just don't have the level of information that lends itself to that kind of educated specificity. And a lot of times people will hide a lack of true understanding behind specificity. So I would always steer clear of that as well. And mostly do what feels good.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
Is like the least scientific, but typically the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I think, Kylie, what are your thoughts? I think there are maybe some hard rules to go off of, but
don't increase your volume by 100% ever.
I'd love to hear from
Yeah,
you, Kylie.
typically, I mean, I do actually incorporate some run walk coming back from injury. I think the important thing to remember is the reason why we're trying to do something like that is to allow for like the musculoskeletal system to adapt to stress. And so the focus shouldn't really be on like building your aerobic system at that time, kind of looking at the musculoskeletal system. And then I'll incorporate some maybe cross training to get some aerobic work, and then doing some run walk to get the musculoskeletal system to adapt. And typically, I believe that can usually occur within like a 2-week period of time, and then transition over to straight runs after that. And so like continuous runs. And then I think it's important to, like you were saying, Zoe, not to just like totally increase the volume right away. I would say frequency of runs and then volume, and building that way is typically how I approach it. And that's kind of what I've seen. I don't know if you guys have seen something different, but
I've seen some pretty wonky PT recommended return to run programs.
I have seen the mile, 2 mile, 3 mile.
I'm not even kidding with that. Like, that's an insane, like that to me, I'm like, get a new PT.
Yeah. And really kind of what this comes down to is 1, severity of injury, 2, length of time off.
Yeah.
So
I think those are the 2 biggest factors. Like
Right.
before we're going to send you to get your bone density analyzed. That's yeah.
And if you are dealing with, a muscle tear or, a stress fracture, those things.
Yeah, soft tissue and bone
really need
different.
to be considered when putting together a very individualized walk run program. Some hard rules you can go with, and for any aspiring coaches listening to the call, if an athlete is out for 2 weeks to 4 weeks, generally you can look at getting into continuous running kind of right away. The caveats to that are, 1, you need to start with about 50% of the athlete's average volume, because when you take time off, it does affect the musculoskeletal system. And so even if you're cross training, those things are low impact, you're not getting the same benefits of strengthening that system. So you need to be very cautious, especially in those early, first couple weeks. So for example, if an athlete is out for 4 weeks, and they're running, 40 miles a week, week 1 would be, around 20 miles. And then week 2 could be 30 miles. And then you're getting close to their average volume again. And that's assuming that nothing goes wrong in the process. And this is where, this is why every coach really should be doing some form of daily check-ins, because you have to have that level you have to have those touch points in order to understand and get the feedback from the athlete with whether or not they're feeling good. Injuries beyond 4 weeks, we're talking about taking months off. Run walk protocol is going to be really vital because of those impact forces. And obviously, if you're taking a lot of time off, there's severity of injury to be considered. So we have to rebuild those systems from the ground up. And it's something that I take very seriously as a coach. When athletes are like, I want more, I'm like, we're doing less, because you can't take those risks. Often it's going to start with 30 seconds of running, followed by probably 2 minutes of walking, maybe 90
And those
seconds.
are not a 30-second stride. I think
Yeah.
a big mistake I see is athletes are like, oh boy, I'm walking. So that means I can really gun it on the run portion. And that is exactly what we want to avoid. The goal is to reduce impact and to reduce intensity, not to allow you to re-injure yourself as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So like the number of weeks that you've been off beyond 4 weeks, I'm considering the number of weeks. I will use that to formulate your plan for the number of walk, run weeks we do, working you back up to continuous runs. And it starts with a run and then a day off, and then a run and then a day off, usually 3 runs a week, somewhere around 30 seconds of running. And we work up to 1, 2, and 3 minute intervals, and then mixing in the back-to-back runs. So your musculoskeletal system has a little bit of more stress, kind of forces some adaptation, and then proper amounts of rest after. And it's a very gradual process. I think like at the other end of this is like, what do I do when I've like, for me, I sprained my ankle pretty badly, and had like a massive swelling and all this stuff a few weeks ago and had to take a week off. You always wait a day. You feel healthy, 100%. Guess what? Wait one more day. Because sometimes these things aren't linear, and it's very normal for an athlete to like, I feel good today, everything's 100%. And then they get out and try to run, and it's like, oh shit, I can't run. So some stuff is
Or
like,
they're like at that point where they're like, well, I could run, but
Right.
it's like, they're not 100%,
yeah. So I really don't, if you get to the point where you're able to walk, walking up and down stairs, moving around the house.
Yeah, if
and
you
there's
can't
no pain,
walk pain-free or like hike athletically pain-free, then you are not ready to run.
And I think also there's that kind of gradual cross-training process. I've got an athlete coming back from tearing some ligaments, using some cycling and then building in some walking to kind of mimic some similar impact. It's not the same, but walking is going to be harder than it is to cycle because you have a lot more body weight on your system there. So it is really important not to rush back into these things. Take your time. You feel 100%. You're walking well around the house. We'll take one more day. And then if that discomfort is more than like 2 out of 10 on your run, you should probably rest another day or not do a back-to-back run until that discomfort comes down to like below 1 out of 10. Because the point isn't just to go out there and run because you have to run. The point is to run healthy and to run happy, and runs that are painful. And I tried this. I was walking around my house like on day 4 or day 5, pain-free. And I go and try to run and take a step, and I like couldn't put running weight on my ankle at all. And then I'd be like, all right, I'll gonna go and cycle, and tomorrow I'll try again, and it took like 3 days of that for me to get back to running again. And you have to be patient with yourself in those moments because you're at risk for making that injury worse. And so, I think maybe just the one making the injury worse. So
also
just be careful.
Work on dismantling. Like a lot of people be like, oh no, I'm going to lose fitness. Just embrace the fact that you are not going to be building fitness while injured. And that is okay. And that is normal. Like part of being an athlete is not always like ramping up and up and up. And a lot of times I've seen people really set themselves back in injury because they're so focused on trying to move forward that they kneecap themselves and end up trying to be like, oh, like my coach said, I can cross train easy. Awesome. I'm going to spend 2 hours on the assault bike. Don't know. That's like really like if you're injured, your body needs additional space, time, and resources to heal. And if you're going to cross train yourself into a pulp, then you're going to make it that much additionally harder for your body to recover. And you just need to be okay with the fact that if you like take the time you need up front, there'll actually be a much quicker return to that place where you can start building again. But if you're in that mindset of like, oh no, I feel like I'm falling behind, and then you make less educated decisions from that space, you're often going to not only not gain fitness, but also set yourself back injury wise.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Kylie, do you want the last word on this?
Not really.
All
I
right.
don't have anything additional that's gonna offer any additional perspective.
Cool, I appreciate that. This question had a part B. So yeah, we'll hit that, and then that might be the end of our time.
Actually, no, I do want to just answer it. That PT recommended starting runs with a 15-minute walk. You don't have to do that.
A 15-minute walk.
You do not have to do that ever. If I tried to start every run I did, like, I mean, just do a warm up. If that's the warm up that works for you, awesome. But I do an actual running, because like, I mean, walking actually doesn't help you fire all the same muscles and neuromuscular, like a warm up. The point of it is to like refine those neuromuscular pathways that you're about to use in running. And walking is a significantly different action than running. Like I do lunges and I do some exercise band to make sure my glutes are engaged. I think that walking is not that great of a warm up.
I would agree in the context of your normal everyday runs. I think in the context of a walk run.
Then a walk
routine,
is great.
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes of walking.
Yeah.
I would actually really like to see athletes do a dynamic warm up before their runs, even if it is a walk run. And then, you can do 5 minutes of walking out there to kind of like further get your system going, and then get into your run walk. I actually with my athletes prescribe 3 to 5 minutes of walking on either end of a run walk routine, not so much for the warm up, but more for like helping an athlete like frame this as like important training. I think seeing kind of like a very precise formula for like getting back into things helps the athlete engage a little bit more with like kind of what feels like, especially if you feel strong coming back from an injury and you want to run. It's very easy to be like, this is freaking lame. Like run walk sucks. Why am I doing this? So like, at least for me and the athletes I coach, it really helps to kind of like frame this as like, these are like specific training steps that you're doing to go from point A to like point B being like continuous running, and from continuous running, it's working back up to the volume that you were at before. Well, cool. Well, I didn't need to read the question because you had your eyes on that one
bugging
for
me. I was
a
like,
while, huh? Yeah.
You don't need to walk for 15 minutes. If you
Cool.
want to, great. But
Yeah.
I feel like I would just get cold.
Well, cool. We have a lot of more questions over the next couple of weeks. Would love it if you guys would email in with more. If anything came to mind for you today, if you want to contribute more to this conversation, please send us an email. We'll be happy to look at that when time allows, and to kind of, talk about it in next Friday's call. There will not be a call on Monday, but there will be a call next Friday. So hope you guys have a good weekend. Get out there and enjoy the last vestiges of fall. Winter is pretty much here where we live. It's been cold in the mornings. Anyways, thanks guys. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you soon.